tonight, let's set aside the shining armor, the gallant knights, and the candlelit banquets that drift through our imagination when we hear the words Middle Ages. The truth was far less forgiving. You wake in the year 1325. The good news, you are alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is no more than a half-rotted pile of straw pressed flat and sour with months of use. It smells faintly of the barn because only 3 months ago it was a barn floor. There is no mattress, no pillows, no soft cotton sheets. Only a wool blanket, heavy with grime, its weight increased over the seasons until it seems to sag like a wet animal across your body. You blink at the sound of the church bell clanging across the valley. It is the closest thing your century has to an alarm clock, louder, less merciful, and entirely indifferent to your fatigue. The walls around you are wood warped by damp air, the gaps stuffed with straw that does little to keep the cold from sliding in. Your home is one room, and everything you own exists within this single space: family livestock, and the small world of insects that thrive here just as you do. The air itself carries its own story. Stale beer from last night, human sweat, the musk of animals, and something you hope is only mold but know in your heart is not. To us, it would seem unbearable. To you, it is simply life. No scented candles, no soap. Only the knowledge that this is the same air your parents breathed and theirs before them. You stretch cautiously. The straw crackles beneath your weight. Cold air nips at your skin, stiffens your fingers, makes your joints ache. You are 22, though. Your body moves as if middle-aged. In truth, you are. Few people live beyond 40 here. Your spine groans as though it belonged to a wooden door, long neglected. You rise and place your bare feet on the floor. It is never simply a floor. Sometimes it is damp with rainwater that has leaked through the thatched roof. Sometimes it is crusted with the leavings of chickens or goats. Whatever it is this morning, it clings. And you step forward into it, part of the ecosystem now, whether you wish it or not. Privacy. The word has no meaning. Your family sleeps side by side, perhaps with a cousin who has not gone home in months. Children, parents, animals, all stirring at once in this shared dawn. There is no curtain to pull, no space to retreat. Only the sound of voices, the shuffle of feet, the murmur of life pressed tightly together. And all of this, every scratch, every smell, every bite of cold air, this is only the beginning. You have not yet faced the water, the food, or the work that awaits. You are only awake. In that moment, do you wonder how many more mornings you will rise in this same room? Or do you simply accept, as your ancestors did, that this is what living means? Welcome to the Middle Ages, where even waking up feels like survival. Morning has only just begun, yet nature calls with an urgency that cannot be ignored. And here in the 14th century, there is no polite answer. There is no door to close, no porcelain seat, no lever to flush. Only improvisation, ritual, and discomfort. For the peasant family, the bathroom is often a wooden bucket waiting outside the hut. Its contents remind you that Uncle Wolfstan had a poor night after eating spoiled turnips, and the smell is heavy, unrelenting. You do what must be done quickly, holding your breath, as though that might shield you from the reality of it. When the bucket is full, there is only one solution: toss it into the street. A quick call, gardez-vous asterisk, the old French cry, meaning watch out below, though few ever move quickly enough. The streets of medieval towns run thick with refuse. Human waste, animal droppings, and liquids too mysterious to name mingle into open sewers that snake through the heart of every settlement. The cobblestones are slick with it. Children play nearby. Pigs root in it. Life carries on in spite of the stench. If you are luckier, if your village or town has invested in public latrines, the experience hardly improves. Here you sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, a row of wooden seats above a pit, the air heavy with the combined presence of bodies and the absence of privacy. Small talk might fill the silence, but breathing deeply is a mistake. The smell lingers in hair, in clothing, in memory. And then there are the castles, those stone giants that seem so noble in stories. Their answer to sanitation is the garderobe, a chamber with a hole in the wall that drops directly into the moat below. The illusion of sophistication fades when you remember that attackers sometimes crept into fortresses by climbing the very chute meant for waste. Enemies entering quite literally through the back door. To wipe, there is no neat roll of paper. Instead, straw moss, a scrap of cloth if one is fortunate. Rags are shared, washed only occasionally. Sometimes nothing at all. And here in these simple acts, one understands why handshakes were rare. It is strange to think that such a private act in our world was once a public ritual, a humiliation endured by every class. Cold, exposed, unsanitary, there was nothing graceful about it. Yet day after day, men and women stepped outside their huts or leaned over their garderobes and accepted it as normal. So you return to your hut, chilled, uncomfortable, already marked by the day. And this too is only a beginning. You have yet to eat. You have yet to work. And already the body reminds you there will be no ease, not here, not now. You survived the morning ritual of waste and humiliation. You return to the hut, stomach stirring, hoping perhaps for comfort. But in the 14th century, comfort is not a word the table knows. Breakfast, if it deserves that name, waits by the hearth. Not eggs or coffee or bread, still warm from an oven, but pottage, a grey simmering stew that never really begins and never truly ends. Into the pot goes whatever can be found, barley, oats, a turnip, maybe a cabbage leaf if fortune allows. It simmers for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients poured over the old until the taste is less a recipe and more a memory of meals long past. Beside the pot lies bread. Not soft, not fragrant, but hard as stone, a coarse loaf cut from rye or barley flour, mixed with whatever filler could stretch it further, ground beans, powdered acorns, even sawdust. To eat it, you don't slice, you negotiate soaking it in the pottage until it softens just enough to yield beneath your teeth. And what to drink? Not water. That small stream nearby may glimmer in the dawn light, but upstream someone has already emptied a chamber pot into it. To drink water here is to invite fever and dysentery. So instead you lift a wooden cup of ale. Weak, cloudy, more liquid bread than drink, but safer than the stream. Even the children drink it. There is no celebration in this. It is only survival in a mug. Meat perhaps on Sundays. Cheese on feast days if your lord feels generous. Fruit only in season and usually fermented into something else before you taste it. A pinch of pepper or cinnamon would cost more than you earn in months. Salt itself is precious enough to be locked away like treasure. So you chew slowly on your gritty bread. You sip ale that tastes faintly sour, wishing it were water clear and cold. And all the while rats and mice hover nearby, bold enough to steal if you look away. Breakfast in the Middle Ages does not energize. It does not delight. It simply happens to you like the weather, like the work that waits outside. And as you swallow the last mouthful of boiled turnip and soggy crust, you understand hunger here is never absent. It is only delayed. Your stomach is heavy with pottage, though never satisfied. It is time to dress, though the word dress feels misleading. There is no choice of garment, no change of season. You have one outfit, one. A rough wool tunic, stiff from use, worn every day until it thins, frays, and dissolves into rags. Underneath, perhaps you own a linen shift. If not, then nothing at all. The wool scratches against your skin, and by midday your body will itch as though it were aflame. But there is no alternative. Linen is costly reserved for those whose hands rarely touch the earth. There is no soap to wash it, no basin to soak it, no line strung with drying cloths. At best, once in a season, water is hauled from the well and heated over a fire. Ashes or lye might be rubbed into the fabric rough and caustic before the tunic is laid out beneath a hesitant sun. But more often the clothing simply accumulates stains, sweat, smoke, and the soft patina of life worn into its weave. Shoes, if you own them, are crude leather stitched by hand, barely more than a thin hide wrapped around the foot. They resist water no better than paper and grow stiff and cracked when the weather turns dry. Many peasants walk barefoot through mud and manure over sharp stones and frozen soil. Every step is its own small trial, and your body knows it. Your skin is not your own. It belongs to fleas, lice, and bedbugs that travel with you everywhere. They are your companions in bed, in the field, in church. Children scratch constantly, women comb hair only to find more movement beneath it. Men laugh at each other's misery because what else is there to do? Your scalp is a battlefield of bites. Your arms are raw from scratching. The rash that creeps across your belly lingers for weeks, untreated, unnamed. There is no ointment, no soothing lotion, no quiet reassurance from a doctor. Only endurance. Always endurance. And as you pull the wool tight against the morning chill, the irony is not lost. Your clothes are meant to shield you. Instead, they are another burden, another layer of discomfort you must carry into the day. You itch, you ache, and still you step forward. Because what choice is there? The world is waiting and the fields do not till themselves. The wool scratches the flea's bite, but nothing compares to the dull throb that waits in your mouth. To smile in the Middle Ages is to reveal a battlefield. There is no toothbrush waiting by the hearth, no minty paste, no rinse to swish and spit. At best, some chew the end of a twig, fraying it into bristles, or rinse with wine or vinegar if they can spare it. But for most, the teeth are left to their own fate, and the result is written clearly on every face. By your mid-20s, your gums are swollen, your teeth darkened, chipped, or missing altogether. Cavities hollow into rot and food packs into every crevice. Pain is a constant presence, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always there. Sugar, that crystalline luxury, is still rare, imported at great cost, consumed mostly by nobles who flaunt their wealth with candied fruit and small cakes. For them, the rot comes quickly, their blackened teeth a visible badge of indulgence. For peasants, the damage comes slowly, worn in by gritty bread, by pottage thick with sand and husks, by years of chewing with no relief. And when the ache becomes unbearable, there are no dentists. There are only barber surgeons. The same man who trims hair or lances boils will press a hot iron hook to your mouth, wedge it against a molar and pull. No numbing, no gentle words, only the raw scream of pain and the prayer that the bleeding will stop. Sometimes the wound festers. An infection spreads. Fever follows. What begins as a single bad tooth can become a death sentence, sepsis, traveling silently through the body. In a world without antibiotics, a toothache is not an inconvenience, it is a gamble with mortality. And yet, life continues. Lovers kiss, mothers soothe their children, priests speak their sermons, all of them breathing the sourness of decay. Bad breath is universal, so common it hardly carries shame. Courtship is measured not by the gleam of a smile, but by the weight of land and livestock. Teeth may rot, but hunger and inheritance do not wait. You press your tongue against the tender spot, wincing at the taste of iron. It will pass or it won't. Either way, the day does not pause for pain. The fields are calling and the back must bend before the sun climbs higher. The mouth aches, but there is no time to dwell on it. Work waits, as it always does. In the Middle Ages, survival is labor, and every sunrise is the beginning of another long endurance. If you are like most 9 out of 10, you are a peasant. That means the land is not your own. It belongs to a lord, a church, or some distant noble who will never know your name. Your duty is simple. Work the fields until your back bows, then give up a portion of what you harvest to those above you. The day begins in the furrows. The soil is heavy, clinging to the wooden hoe. If you are fortunate, there is an ox to pull the plough, its breath steaming in the morning air. If not, then it is your shoulders, your muscles dragging the blade across stubborn ground. The work is relentless. Seeds are sown by hand, weeds tugged from roots, water carried in heavy buckets from wells or streams. Your tools are basic, your body the most reliable instrument you own. And it must keep going. For women, the burden doubles. You work in the fields alongside the men, but when you return to the hut, the tasks multiply: cooking, tending fires, caring for children, spinning wool, feeding animals, repairing what little clothing the family owns. There is no separation between labor and home, both consume you. Children do not wait for childhood. By the age of 5, a boy carries a rake nearly his own height. A girl helps stir pottage or fetches water from the well, her small arms already learning the ache of endless repetition. School is a distant dream for the very few. For most, play is replaced by survival before the teeth are fully grown. And if you are not a farmer, perhaps you are a blacksmith hammering sparks from iron until the smoke stings your eyes. Or a tanner, your hands forever steeped in the stench of animal hides. Or a cooper shaping wood into barrels while your lungs fill with dust. None escape the toll. Each trade carries its own exhaustion, its own hazards. There are no weekends, no holidays as we know them. The only pause comes on Sundays, and even then the church may call you to fields if the harvest is pressing, or to prayers if plague is near. One day of rest can vanish as quickly as the clouds pass over the sun. The work is not for ambition. There are no promotions, no climbing upward. Work is to live one more day. To miss a day is to risk hunger. To miss a week is to invite death. The rhythm is ancient, steady, merciless sunrise to sunset, season after season, until the body finally breaks. You grip the hoe tighter. Blisters form, cracks deepen across your palms, and yet you keep moving. Not because you want to, but because the earth and the Lord demand it. This is not a job. It is a lifetime. A slow surrender of strength to soil. The body bends to the soil, but even the soil has its moods. In the Middle Ages, the weather itself feels less like a backdrop and more like a punishment. Winter comes first with its long, aching nights. Your hut is built of timber, its walls gapped, the roof thatched but never tight. The wind slides through like a thief, finding every corner, chilling the bones of everyone inside. Glass windows do not exist here. Instead, scraps of cloth or wood are pressed into the frame, fluttering when the gusts press harder. A hearth smoulders at the center of the room, but fuel is scarce. Firewood is not yours for the taking. In many forests, gathering fallen branches can be punished by law, sometimes even by death, because the land belongs to a lord. So you ration what you have. The flames never burn bright enough to truly warm. Your breath hangs visible in the air. Your feet ache with damp, frozen for months at a time. Frostbite is not diagnosed. It is simply bad luck. Then comes summer, and with it another trial. The hut, which in winter felt like a frozen cave, becomes an oven. The air is heavy, stifling. Sweat seeps into the wool that already itches against your skin, but removing layers is not an option. Modesty, sunburn, and the bite of insects keep you covered even as your body longs for air. Flies gather, drawn to the smell of food left simmering in the pot or the scent of animals penned too close. Mosquitoes hum through the night, and you swat in vain as their whine circles your ears. Sleep, already fragile, becomes a battle, and still at sunrise the fields demand you return. There is no reprieve for heat stroke, no shaded office to retreat into. You keep moving until your body can no longer manage. Spring and autumn bring their own worries. Too much rain and the fields flood. Too little and the crops wither. Each season is a wager. One storm too many, one drought too long, and hunger is waiting. Through it all there is one constant discomfort. Cold or heat, damp or dust, the body never knows ease. Every day is endured beneath the weight of the sky, whatever mood it carries. You lift your face to the wind, whether it chills or stings. There is no bargaining with it. You endure as your ancestors endured because there is no other choice. When the day grows long and sweat clings beneath your wool, the body craves only one thing: water. Yet in the Middle Ages, water is not your friend. It is a gamble, a clear liquid hiding unseen armies. The stream nearby looks fresh, glimmering in the light, its surface broken only by reeds and dragonflies. But you know better. Upstream, a neighbor has emptied a chamber pot. A pig carcass floats in another bend. Parasites, bacteria, and invisible dangers swarm in every mouthful. A sip may ease thirst now, but it can also summon fevers, cramps, or worse. This is why ale is safer even for children. Brewing means boiling, and boiling kills some of what lurks in the water. The ale is weak, cloudy, barely more than liquid bread, but it does not kill as quickly, and so the day begins and ends with it, the bitter taste swallowed more out of necessity than pleasure. The wealthy may drink wine, though its heaviness often leaves them stumbling before noon. For them, intoxication is a privilege, another mark of rank. For peasants, sobriety is impossible. Everyone drinks the same small beer because survival demands it. And what of bathing? Water might cleanse, but many believe it is dangerous. Bathing, they say, opens the pores and invites illness in. Dirt, by contrast, seals the body like armor. And so the logic goes, it is safer to remain unwashed. Communal bathhouses do exist, places where one can soak in hot water or gossip with neighbors. But they soon develop reputations as dens of scandal, and the church frowns upon them. Many are closed. The rest become places of suspicion rather than relief. At home, bathing is an ordeal. Water must be hauled from a well or stream, heated over fire and poured into a wooden tub that leaks as soon as it is filled. One person's bathwater is often another's rinse, the same murky liquid passed along through the household. A rare indulgence quickly abandoned when time and energy run short. Even rainwater collected in barrels cannot be trusted. Birds foul it, insects breed in it, algae blooms across the surface. The barrel is a swamp, more than a cistern, so you wipe your face with a damp rag or rub your hands with ashes when they feel especially unclean. And you drink what you must, always knowing that each sip carries risk. Water should give life. Here it threatens it. Every swallow is a quiet act of faith, hoping that today will not be the day your body rebels. If the water does not sit well, if fever rises or pain settles deep in the bones, you need a healer. But in the Middle Ages, medicine is not what we imagine. It is less science and more ritual, less cure and more endurance. Illness, they believe, comes from imbalance. Inside the body swirl four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. To be well is to keep them balanced. To be sick is to let one overflow. And so the treatment begins with correction, not comfort. A fever, too much blood. The remedy is bloodletting. You sit pale and trembling as a barber surgeon ties your arm and opens a vein. The blood runs into a bowl, and with it they believe the sickness drains away. If the fever lingers, they may turn to leeches, the small creatures clinging to your skin until they fall off swollen with what you could not afford to lose. A troubled stomach is treated with laxatives, purges, or bitter herbs. Melancholy, what we would call depression, is too much black bile. The answer: vomiting, cold compresses, and prayer. Always prayer. And if the body breaks, a bone fractured in the field, a wound torn open in work or war, the outlook is grim. Knives and saws are heated not to sterilize, but to cut faster, to cauterize, in hope the bleeding will stop. There is no anesthesia, only cloth to bite, and perhaps a friend to hold you still. Infection is almost certain. Death often follows. There is no understanding of germs, no concept of hygiene. Illness is blamed on bad air, on sin, on the displeasure of God. A cough may be treated with holy water, a rash with charms, a persistent ache with the priest's blessing. Some remedies help by chance. Many do nothing. Some harm more than the illness itself. And yet doctors, or those who call themselves such, carry authority. They read from heavy manuscripts, prescribe elaborate mixtures, grind beetles or burn herbs, all in the name of restoring balance. If the patient survives, their wisdom is praised. If not, the blame rests on fate. To be sick here is not simply to suffer, it is to risk being made worse in the attempt to be healed. The cure may cut as deep as the illness. You lie back on straw, fever, burning leeches, clinging prayers whispered above your head. Perhaps you recover, perhaps you do not. Either way, medicine in this world feels less like hope and more like a slow negotiation with death. The day has drained you, and hunger presses harder than pain. Evening comes, and with it, the promise of food. Yet here too the promise is thin. Your meal is a repeat of the morning pottage, thicker now, darker from another day of simmering. The stew has no recipe. It is an inheritance, a pot never emptied, only added to. Root vegetables float beside scraps of barley, all flavoured by the ghost of meals long past. A family might say it has been cooking for weeks, a single stew that outlives seasons. Bread sits beside it, still coarse, still heavy. In good years it is rough but edible. In bad years it is stretched with bark, with bean husks, even with clay. Rye bread carries another danger, a fungus called ergot. Its presence is invisible until it takes hold, twisting the body with convulsions, blackening the limbs, filling the mind with visions. To eat is to risk madness. Yet to starve is certain death, and so you eat. Meat is rare, more a memory than a reality. A sliver of bacon if it was saved, a scrap of salted fish if trade has been kind. Preservation is crude. Meat hangs in smoke, crusted with salt, alive with flies. By the time it reaches your bowl, it tastes of desperation. Vegetables dominate the diet, though variety does not. Turnips, onions, cabbage boiled until their shapes blur, their flavors dulled into sameness. Fruit, when it appears, spoils quickly, too precious to last. Salt is treasure carefully measured. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg are fantasies traded at prices beyond a peasant's imagination. For you, flavor is not a luxury. It is an absence, a reminder of your place in the world. And food is not only sustenance, it is politics. Game animals in the forest are not yours to hunt. Rabbits, deer, even fish from certain streams belong to the Lord. To poach is to risk punishment, fines, imprisonment, even death. The hunger that gnaws at your belly cannot be eased by the woods at your doorstep. The law guards the forest more fiercely than the people. So you sit by the fire, chewing bread that grinds against your teeth, sipping stew that tastes of smoke and soil. You eat not to savor, but to silence hunger long enough to sleep. And as the pot settles back over the coals, you know tomorrow it will be the same. The stew will thicken, the bread will harden, and hunger will return. Always it returns. The meal settles uneasily, but your day does not yet belong to rest. In the Middle Ages, your life belongs to God, or more precisely to the church that claims to speak for him. The bell you heard at dawn is heard again at dusk. Its toll is not only a marker of time, but a command. Prayer orders the day. Morning, noon, and night you bow, you cross yourself, you whisper words. You may not fully understand, for the Bible is not written in your tongue. It is in Latin, a language closed to peasants, kept in the mouths of priests and monks. The church stands at the center of your village. Its spire rises above the fields, a shadow of stone that reminds you where your loyalties must fall. It is not only a place of worship, it is law calendar and overseer. You are measured not by the harvest alone, but by the coins or eggs or grain you surrender as tithe, a tenth of all you have, even when all you have feels too little. Sin is everywhere. To miss Mass is a sin. To eat meat on the wrong day is a sin. To think lustful thoughts, even in dreams, is a sin. And every sin bears its own punishment here or beyond. Priests speak vividly of hell, lakes of fire, demons with claws, screams that never end. The stories are not distant threats. They are warnings you carry with you into sleep. Festivals, too, are bound by faith. Holy days interrupt labor, but not for joy. They demand confession, fasting, solemn rituals. Even the moments that glitter faintly with music or candles are framed as obligations, not indulgences. The church is present at every turn of life. Birth is marked by baptism, marriage by blessing, death by prayer. Its reach is inescapable, its authority unquestioned. To doubt aloud is to risk being named a heretic, a label that can end at the stake. Even whispers can be enough to burn. And yet for all its weight, faith offers its comfort. A hymn sung in the dark may soothe more than food can. A priest's hand upon the brow may calm the fevered. Heaven promised, beyond the dirt and pain, is the one horizon that glimmers with something other than survival. So you kneel not because you choose to, but because it is what everyone does. The firelight flickers on the walls of the hut. You fold your hands, you murmur prayers you half know, and you hope silently that God is kinder than the world you see. Faith binds the community, but within that order life is not equal. To be born a woman in the Middle Ages is to walk a path already marked out narrow and unyielding. From childhood, a girl's future is decided less by choice than by arrangement. Marriage comes early, often before the body has fully grown. To be 12 and betrothed is common. To bear children by 14 is expected. Love is seldom part of the matter. Marriage is transaction, land, livestock alliances sealed with vows. Her opinion is not asked. Once married, she belongs to her husband. Her duty is to bear heirs, to keep the household alive, to serve without protest. Her name fades beneath his, her labor folded into his survival. If she complains, she risks being branded quarrelsome or worse, witch. The word is sharp and its consequences sharper: shunning, drowning, or fire. Childbirth is the greatest trial. There is no clean chamber, no physician waiting with instruments of safety. A midwife may guide the process, but even small complications can end in death for mother, child, or both. To give life is also to stand on the threshold of losing one's own. Many women survive 10 births. Many die after 2. Each pregnancy is a gamble, and each scream in labor is shadowed by prayers for mercy. And yet once the child is born, there is no rest. The infant clings to the breast, the hearth must still be tended, the fields still worked, the family still fed. Exhaustion is constant. Relief does not come. For the unmarried, suspicion waits. A woman without a husband is dangerous in the eyes of the village, either pitied as useless or whispered about as untrustworthy. For widows, vulnerability is sharper still. Property may be stripped, children may be taken, neighbors may circle like crows. Even within the church, where women sometimes flee for safety, the walls are lined with rules. Nuns live under strict silence, obedience, confinement. Their prayers rise, but their voices are seldom heard. Always they are placed below men in spirit as in life. To live as a woman here is to endure not only the common trials of hunger, disease, and labor, but an added weight of invisibility. You are seen but seldom acknowledged. You are essential but rarely honored. And yet through all this, women survive. They sing lullabies into smoky nights. They share herbs and knowledge across generations. They mend what breaks, tend what grows, and bear burdens that history often forgets to name. If life in the Middle Ages is hard for everyone, for women it is harder still. Life lived on its sharpest edge, without armor, without reprieve. The day is long, the burdens heavy, but if there is one constant beyond hunger and toil, it is violence. In the Middle Ages, blood is not an exception. It is a rhythm woven into daily life. Crime runs through the villages and towns, petty theft, quarrels over land disputes at markets. Justice, when it comes, is never gentle. Steal a loaf of bread and your hand might be cut away. Spread lies or gossip too freely, and your tongue could be pierced with iron. A woman who scolds too loudly might be forced into the scold's bridle. A metal cage for the head with a bar pressed against the mouth, humiliation strapped in place for all to see. Accusations carry their own terror. If you are named a thief, a heretic, or a witch, your innocence is not proved by testimony but by ordeal. Your hand might be thrust into boiling water to grasp a stone. If the burn heals cleanly, God has spared you, and you are declared innocent. If it festers, you are guilty, or you might be bound and thrown into a river. Sink, and you are innocent though drowned. Float, and you are guilty, and punishment follows. The trial is not meant to reveal truth. It is meant to reveal submission. Execution is spectacle. Crowds gather as if to festival. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, each one a lesson written in flesh. Children watch. Merchants sell food nearby. For a brief hour, death is entertainment. The body becomes warning, and the village continues on. Violence lives also within the household. Husbands strike wives and children not in secret but as right. Discipline is expected, even praised. To raise a hand is to keep order. Silence meets it more often than protest. And beyond the homes, wars simmer. Lords feud kings, squabble crusades, march in the name of faith or pride. Men are pulled from fields to battlefields, carrying rusty spears and hope that the wound will not come too quickly. Villages are burned fields, left fallow families scattered. For those not in armor, violence arrives all the same, a tide that takes without asking. There is no sense that peace is normal and violence the interruption. Here the reverse is true. Violence is the air itself, sometimes sharp, sometimes distant, but always present. So you walk carefully, eyes lowered, hands steady, because a wrong glance, a careless word, a hungry choice could end with your body broken before the crowd. Violence marks the day, but even without sword or whip, death waits close at hand. To live in the Middle Ages is to live beside it, to see it in neighbours, in children, in the mirror of your own body. Life expectancy hovers low. 30, perhaps 40 years, though the number is deceiving. Many die in infancy, their names never remembered beyond the family hearth. Nearly half of all children do not reach their 5th year. A cough that lingers, a fever that will not break a single winter too harsh, these are enough to carry them away. For those who survive, childhood, adulthood arrives quickly, often with joints already aching, teeth already gone, bodies already bent. For women, childbirth is as dangerous as battle. Each pregnancy carries the risk of death. There are no clean tools, no safe woods, no physicians with knowledge to intervene. A mother may cry out in the night, surrounded by midwives and family, only to fade with the dawn. Many children are born, but not all mothers remain to see them grow. Men face their own fates. A cut on the hand while farming, a foot crushed beneath a plough, an infection from a rusty blade, any small wound may swell, darken and spread until fever takes the body. A drunken quarrel at a tavern may end with a cracked skull. A press of soldiers passing through the village may sweep you into their ranks, your life spent for a lord's ambition. And above all, disease prowls like a shadow. Plague strikes in waves, emptying towns in days, filling churchyards faster than graves can be dug. Famine too lingers when crops fail, when rains drown or withhold, when the stores empty before spring returns. In those years the weak grow weaker, the young wither, and whole families disappear. Even funerals offer little comfort. The dead are wrapped, simply placed in shallow graves, earth turned quickly to prevent contagion. Coffins are rare, embalming unknown. Death is too common for ceremony. A prayer murmured, a mound raised, and life resumes, for the living cannot stop long. To survive past 40 is a rarity, a marvel spoken of with quiet wonder. To be called old is less insult than miracle. And even then it is not ease you find, but a body worn by years of toil, each joint stiff, each step slower. In this world, death is not a distant fear. It is companion, reminder, and certainty. Every day lived is borrowed time. And still each morning the bell tolls and the village rises again, knowing the shadow has not gone, only waited. So now you have walked through a single day, waking on straw, drinking ale for survival, working until the spine bends, praying when commanded, eating because hunger demands it, never because food delights. This was life for most, not the shimmering legend of knights and castles. The myth tells of gallant warriors riding beneath banners of noble ladies, waiting in high towers of feasts glowing with firelight and laughter. But the truth is harder. Castles were not warm refuges. They were cold, draughty stone chambers where fleas crawled just as they did in peasant huts. Nobles wrapped themselves in furs and drank strong wine, yet still shivered through long winters. Their marriages were not tales of romance, but contracts of power. Their lives, too, ended suddenly with infection, with battle, with plague. The dream of simpler times was never simple. Everything took longer, hurt, more cost dearly. To build a fire meant hauling wood. To eat meant days of sowing, weeding, grinding and boiling. To heal meant enduring leeches or bloodletting. Even joy was shadowed by obligation, by the church's watchful eye, by hunger always waiting. And yet for all its misery, life was not empty. People still laughed, sang songs in the evenings, carved small figures from wood, whispered stories by firelight. They fell in love even when marriage was arranged. They cradled infants, mourned the dead-planted seeds with hope that spring would be kind. Human beings stubborn, as they are always found space for light. It is strange perhaps to think that in those dark huts with fleas and famine close at hand, someone might have felt joy, brief, fragile, but real. A song rising from tired voices, a stolen moment of warmth beside a fire, a prayer whispered not from fear but from longing. The Middle Ages were not a dream of romance. They were not a world of endless horror either. They were a place of survival, of small mercies of people enduring what they could not change. And tonight, as you rest in a soft bed with clean sheets, water flowing clear from the tap, food that will not poison, medicine that can heal, you can close your eyes and feel the distance, and maybe quietly give thanks to those who came before, who carried the weight of that world, so that we might not have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, she was simply Sophie. Sophie Friederike, August von Anhalt-Zerbst. The name itself feels heavy, too large for a child born in a modest German principality in 1729, a place more obscure than powerful, more provincial than grand. Her family carried titles but little influence. Yet even here in this small world, Sophie's eyes were set on something larger. Her father, a Prussian officer, was distant, rigid, more accustomed to discipline than affection. Her mother, calculating and cold, thought less of nurturing than of climbing ladders of rank. In such a household, warmth was rare, but ambition was everywhere. Sophie learned quickly to observe before speaking, to measure words, to read not just books but faces. She devoured stories, languages, lessons, French, German, a touch of Latin. She learned to bow, to smile when required, to swallow disappointment when ignored. The courtly world was not yet hers, but she studied it with hunger. Some girls dream of dresses. Sophie dreamed of strategy. Then came the summons that would change everything. In 1744, Empress Elizabeth of Russia was seeking a bride for her nephew and heir, Grand Duke Peter. He was of German blood himself, and the Empress thought a foreign bride grateful for the honor would be easy to guide. Sophie was chosen. 14 years old, thin, pale, but already disciplined in patience. The journey east was long and cold. Imagine leaving your familiar villages and fields for the vastness of Russia, its frozen rivers and endless forests stretching under skies you had never seen. Sophie travelled wrapped in borrowed furs, stepping into a land both alien and immense. In St. Petersburg, she was thrust into a world of glittering ceremony and silent suspicion. Russian courtiers watched her carefully, weighing every gesture, every word spoken in accented Russian. She knew she must not falter, and so she did what she always did. She adapted. She learned the Russian tongue with diligence, memorized Orthodox rituals, studied the history and customs of her new home. When the time came to abandon her Lutheran faith, she did so with ceremony, kneeling as her forehead was anointed, rising as Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The transformation was more than ritual, it was a rebirth. There was no going back. The bridges were burned. The girl named Sophie was left behind in Pomerania. Catherine now stood at the threshold of an empire. No one in that glittering hall could have known what would follow: the revolutions, the betrayals, the sheer audacity of what she would claim. But Catherine knew even then that survival was not enough. She would need to shape her life with her own hands in a world that wanted her only as a pawn. And pawns, when moved carefully, can become queens. Catherine entered marriage not with hope, but with calculation. The union to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her future, yet from the first days it felt less like a crown and more like a cage. Peter was heir to the Russian throne, but not to its spirit. Awkward, thin, and restless, he preferred his toy soldiers to the duties of state. He spent hours staging miniature battles in his chambers, his laughter echoing like a boy's rather than a man's. He idolized Frederick of Prussia, the king of his native blood, and scorned the customs of the Russian court that had adopted him. Catherine, in contrast, gave herself wholly to Russia. She learned its tongue until her words carried no foreign edge. She studied its religion, bowed to its icons, memorized the rituals that framed each day. When courtiers whispered, she listened. When priests chanted, she followed every phrase. She had chosen to belong not by birth but by will. Between them, there was no harmony. Peter ignored her, mocked her, sometimes left her alone for days while he played at war or sulked in drink. Some whispered he refused even to consummate their marriage for years. She felt the emptiness of it in her chambers, the coldness of a husband who seemed more like a child entrusted to her than a partner meant to stand beside her. But Catherine was not idle. She turned isolation into practice, learning the delicate art of patience. She charmed servants with small kindnesses, gained allies among the court with gestures of respect, and quietly studied those who held power. Where Peter sulked, Catherine observed. Where he burned bridges, she built them. It was a marriage in name only, but within its confines Catherine grew sharper. She learned that survival in a hostile court required not only intelligence but restraint. To speak at the wrong time could mean exile. To act too boldly could mean ruin. And so she played her part, dutiful wife, quiet consort, the foreign girl who smiled and listened. Yet inside her mind was restless. She read by candlelight Enlightenment thinkers smuggled into her chambers. Montesquieu, Voltaire, voices that spoke of reason, of strength, of rulers who shaped nations rather than suffered them. These words, foreign to Russia, took root in her. Her marriage offered little love, but it gave her something else, the gift of contrast. By watching Peter's failures, she learned how not to rule. By enduring his neglect, she discovered the value of dignity. And by hiding her ambition, she began to nurture it slowly, silently, as though warming an ember beneath layers of ash. The court thought Catherine a pawn, silent and safe. Peter thought her irrelevant. Neither saw what was forming within her. In the silence of a loveless marriage, Catherine was sharpening herself for the life to come. The Russian court was not a sanctuary. It was a stage of whispers, a place where smiles hid daggers, and every gesture was weighed for meaning. To live within it was to live beneath constant watch. Catherine's letters were opened before they reached her. Servants were questioned about her movements. Courtiers studied her expressions as though they might reveal treason. Even her friendships were measured, charted, sometimes cut away before they could grow roots. She was foreign, young, untested, and above all expendable. Yet Catherine was not intimidated. She understood that in such a world, noise was dangerous, but silence could be powerful. She played her role carefully, polite, gracious, never too outspoken. She walked the halls with measured steps, listened more than she spoke, and allowed others to underestimate her. Behind that calm exterior, however, she was building. Slowly, patiently, she reached for allies. A general here, a scholar there, a priest impressed by her devotion, a noble woman softened by her courtesy. Each connection was small on its own, but together they formed a web, delicate, hidden, and strong enough to catch opportunity when it came. At night, when the candles burned low, Catherine turned to her books. Enlightenment ideas drifted into her chambers like contraband. She read Montesquieu's words on laws and liberty, Voltaire's wit on religion and reason. To others, they were just pages from distant Europe. To Catherine, they were seeds of vision. She began to imagine a Russia stronger, broader, steadier than the one she saw unraveling around her. Meanwhile, Peter stumbled. He grew careless, alienating those he might have leaned on. He mocked Russian customs, played at soldiering when real duties called, and surrounded himself with flatterers rather than advisers. Where Catherine sought belonging, Peter sought escape. His immaturity widened the gulf between them, and the court noticed. But Catherine never revealed her contempt. She smiled at his side when demanded, endured his tantrums in silence, and bowed when eyes turned toward her. The court thought her docile, a quiet ornament in the shadow of her husband. They did not see the calculations beneath her, calm, the slow gathering of strength. For Catherine, these years of suspicion and silence were an apprenticeship. She learned the rhythm of the court, the dangers of pride, the necessity of patience. She studied not just the books of philosophers, but the living book of power, who owed favors, who bore grudges, who might be swayed with kindness, who with ambition. It was a court of shadows, and Catherine learned to move among them without leaving a trace. The foreign girl had become something else entirely, a presence felt more than seen, waiting, watching, preparing. The throne was not yet hers, but she was already rehearsing how to sit upon it. The years of waiting could not last forever. In 1762, fate shifted. Empress Elizabeth died, and with her passing, the throne passed to Peter Catherine's husband, now Peter the Third Emperor of Russia. For Catherine, it was the moment she had dreaded and prepared for. Peter, already immature as a man, became reckless as a ruler. He alienated the nobility with careless decrees, mocked the church by seizing lands, and courted scandal by praising Frederick of Prussia, Russia's bitter enemy. The army, the clergy, the court itself all felt insulted, betrayed, or neglected. Catherine watched. Quietly, carefully, she took the measure of each mistake. Where Peter scattered enemies, she gathered allies. Where he sowed disdain, she whispered reassurance. The nobility, restless under Peter's rule, began to look toward her, not the awkward German boy who played with soldiers, but the foreign-born woman who had embraced Russia as her own. When the moment ripened, Catherine did not hesitate. With whispers of conspiracy turning into calls for action, she moved swiftly. Soldiers loyal to her cause gathered. Priests blessed her name. Nobles pledged support. On a June morning, Catherine mounted a horse, dressed not as a timid consort but as a sovereign. She rode before the troops in full regalia, her voice firm, her presence commanding. The soldiers cheered, their bayonets lifted, not for Peter but for her. In that instant, Catherine was no longer the wife of the emperor. She was the empress in her own right. Peter fled, bewildered, his power dissolving like frost in sunlight. Within days, he was forced to abdicate. Weeks later, he was dead. Under mysterious circumstances, strangled, many believed, though Catherine denied involvement. What mattered was not the method, but the result. Catherine stood unchallenged, crowned by will and daring rather than inheritance. It was audacious, unthinkable, a young woman, foreign by birth, deposing her husband and seizing one of the largest empires in the world. But Catherine understood what others did not, that hesitation is death in politics. She had waited long enough. Now she struck with precision. The world watched in shock. Some saw scandal, some saw miracle. But in Russia, on that summer day in 1762, Catherine transformed herself from a shadow in her husband's court into the ruler of a vast and restless empire. And as she looked upon the gilded halls now hers, she must have felt what she had always known: pawns, when moved with patience and daring, can indeed become queens. To seize power was one triumph. To keep it was another. Catherine knew that force had given her the throne, but it would not be enough to hold it. She needed vision, something larger than fear, something that could bind her empire together. And so she turned to the ideas she had carried with her since girlhood. The books she had once read in candlelit secrecy now became her compass. Montesquieu, Voltaire, Diderot, men she had admired from afar, were now her correspondents. Letters crossed borders, filled with questions, arguments, admiration. Catherine, a woman ruling one of the most conservative empires in Europe, was now in conversation with the brightest minds of the Enlightenment. She dreamed of reshaping Russia not only with armies but with thought. She drafted her instruction, a sweeping document that declared torture unjust, that called for laws to serve the people, that whispered of equality before the law. For Russia, these words were radical, too radical. Nobles applauded politely, then ignored what threatened their privileges. Serfs bound to the land saw little change. Catherine's vision clashed with the stone weight of tradition, but still she pressed on. She founded schools, including the first for girls. She encouraged the printing of books, the spread of ideas, the birth of a Russian intellectual life. She sought to civilize not through conquest alone, but through culture. She imagined herself as a new kind of ruler, an empress with the mind of a philosopher. Yet she was never naive. Catherine knew that ideals could only stretch so far before they snapped. She spoke of liberty, but she left serfdom intact. The peasants who tilled the soil, who bent their backs beneath unending labor, remained bound by chains older than her reign. To challenge that system was to risk revolt from the very nobles she needed to survive. This was Catherine's paradox, the woman who dreamed of reason, who loved the brilliance of the Enlightenment, who wrote of justice and equality, yet who ruled an empire by compromise, by necessity, by the iron hand hidden beneath velvet gloves. She was no pure philosopher. She was something rarer, a ruler who dared to dream and yet never forgot that survival demanded sacrifice. In her halls glittered the light of reason. Beyond them stretched fields of poverty. Catherine stood between both, balancing visions with realities, daring to believe that Russia might one day carry both sword and book with equal weight. Ideas filled Catherine's chambers, but power was not secured by books alone. In the 18th century, the measure of an empire was not only its laws or its culture, it was its borders. And Catherine was determined that Russia's borders would grow. She set her eyes first upon the south. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had pressed against Russia, guarding the warm waters of the Black Sea. Without those ports, Russia was trapped, frozen each winter, its fleets locked by ice. With them it could trade, expand, breathe. The wars came in waves, hard and bloody. Russian armies marched southward, clashing with Ottoman forces across fields and rivers. The names of generals Suvorov, Potemkin rose into legend. Victories piled upon victories until treaties forced the Ottomans to yield. Crimea was annexed. Ports glittered with Russian ships. The empire had found its window to the sea, but Catherine did not stop there. To the west lay Poland, weakened, divided by factions prey to its stronger neighbours. Catherine joined with Austria and Prussia, carving the nation into pieces. The partitions of Poland were ruthless, an entire kingdom erased from the map, its people scattered beneath foreign crowns. For Russia, it was expansion. For Poland, it was tragedy. Each conquest fed Catherine's vision of Russia as a true European power. No longer the half-forgotten giant of the East, but a player in the great game of kings and emperors. Her armies stretched across frontiers, her diplomats sat at every table, her shadow lengthened over Europe. And yet each gain carried weight. Expansion brought new peoples, Tatars, Ukrainians, Poles, each with their own loyalties, their own resentments. An empire could grow wide, but could it hold together? Catherine understood this tension. She knew that every mile won on the battlefield demanded vigilance in the years that followed. Still, for her, expansion was destiny. Russia had been a sleeping giant. Under Catherine, it stirred, stretched, and strode onto the stage of history. She was not merely ruling a country, she was shaping a continent. Empire stretched beneath her feet, armies marched at her command, yet Catherine was still a woman of flesh and blood. And though history often prefers to paint rulers in marble, she was never made of stone. From her earliest days in Russia, her marriage had offered no affection, no partnership. When she seized the throne, she seized it alone. But Catherine was not content to rule without companionship. She chose lovers not in secret shame, but as part of her life, her court, even her politics. The list was long whispered about by enemies, exaggerated by gossips. Some were fleeting men of charm or beauty, others left deeper marks. For Catherine, these relationships were not only passion but alliance. She ensured her lovers were rewarded often with titles, estates, or positions of trust. In return, they gave loyalty, intimacy, and a shield against isolation. Of them all, one name stood apart: Grigory Potemkin. Soldier, statesman, visionary, Potemkin was more than lover, more than advisor. He was her partner in empire. Together they dreamed of a southern Russia, reborn new cities, fertile lands, fleets upon the Black Sea. He had the daring, she had the authority. Together they had momentum. Court gossips mocked. European satirists sketched cruel caricatures, painting Catherine as voracious, insatiable, scandalous. They whispered stories, some absurd, some malicious, designed to diminish her, to reduce her brilliance to bedroom tales. But Catherine did not bend beneath them. She understood that a woman in power would always be judged more harshly, her private life used as weapon. She did not apologize. She did not retreat. To her, passion and power were not enemies. They were parts of the same life threads woven together. She could command armies by day and share laughter with Potemkin by night. She could draft decrees in the morning and still long for a hand to hold when the halls grew cold. Perhaps that was her greatest defiance, that she refused to be only one thing. She was empress, philosopher, conqueror, lover, not marble but flesh, not myth but human. and in her humanity lay her strength. For even as enemies tried to shame her, Catherine remained unshaken. Her reign was not diminished by her passions, it was enriched by them. For years, Catherine spoke the language of reason. She praised Enlightenment ideals, wrote of justice, corresponded with philosophers who saw in her a monarch of the future. But in 1773, the dream cracked. The rebellion began in the steppes far from St. Petersburg's gilded halls. Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack soldier, rose with a bold and dangerous lie. He claimed to be Peter III. Catherine's long-dead husband returned to reclaim his throne. For peasants bound to the soil, beaten by nobles, crushed by endless dues, it was a spark in dry grass. They followed him not for love of Peter, but for hope that chains might break. The uprising spread like fire. Villages burned. Nobles were hunted, their estates ransacked, their throats cut in vengeance. Armies of peasants, ragged and furious, clashed against imperial troops. For a moment, the empire itself trembled. The woman who had dreamed of reform now faced the fury of those who wanted it most. Catherine could not meet rebellion with philosophy. She met it with iron. Loyal generals marched, soldiers struck without mercy, entire villages were punished, thousands were executed. Pugachev was captured, paraded through Moscow in chains, and publicly beheaded. His followers were scattered, his dream broken, but Catherine herself was changed. If once she had thought of liberty, now she thought of order. If once she had entertained visions of loosening serfdom, now she tightened its grip. She had seen what unrest could unleash. She would not risk it again. The rebellion revealed the fault line at the heart of her reign. Enlightenment ideals were easy to praise from palaces, but harder to apply in fields where peasants starved. Catherine could admire Voltaire and Diderot, but she could not unbind millions from servitude without shattering the empire she had built. So she chose stability. She chose power. The philosopher-empress hardened into the pragmatist ruler. The dream of progress remained, but it lived in books, in salons, in paintings, not in the soil, not in the lives of peasants who continued to toil. This was Catherine's reality, that an empire is not governed by ideals alone, but by the iron weight of necessity. And for all her brilliance, she could not escape that truth. If rebellion revealed the darkness of empire, Catherine sought light elsewhere. She knew that wars and decrees could shape borders, but culture could shape memory. And Catherine longed to be remembered not only as conqueror but as creator. She began with the Hermitage. What started as a private retreat, rooms filled with canvases, sculptures, rare books, grew into a treasure house. She collected works from across Europe, Rembrandt, Rubens, Raphael. She purchased entire libraries, brought in architects, filled her palace with art that had never before touched Russian soil. Each piece was not just beauty but statement. Russia, long seen as backward, would now stand alongside Paris, Vienna, Rome. Education, too, became her project. She founded schools not only for the sons of nobles but for their daughters as well. In an age when women were often left outside the halls of learning, Catherine opened doors. She brought new presses into Russia, spreading books, ideas, voices. Knowledge became a tool of empire as vital as any army. Even medicine found her hand. When smallpox ravaged Europe, Catherine did what no ruler before her dared. She rolled up her sleeve, received the new inoculation, and lived to tell it. Her act carried a message stronger than any decree. If the empress trusted science, so could her people. Cities grew under her reign. Roads stretched farther. Palaces gleamed. The Russia she had inherited, vast but rough, was smoothed, polished, given shape. Catherine wanted more than survival. She wanted grandeur. And yet, for all her building, her empire remained divided. The peasants still laboured in chains, rebellion still smouldered beneath the surface. But Catherine believed that beauty had power of its own, that art and learning could elevate a nation even if its foundations remained cracked. So she built and built and built again. A library here, a gallery there, a school in one province, a palace in another. Her reign stretched nearly 35 years, and in that time she left Russia larger, brighter, and more confident than she had found it. The warrior had secured her borders. The builder now secured her place in memory. Time spares no crown. Even as Catherine built, expanded, and ruled with brilliance, the years pressed upon her. By the 1782nd, she was no longer the young woman who had ridden out to seize a throne. Her hair silvered, her body softened, yet her mind remained sharp. She read, she wrote, she planned. She still signed decrees in her own hand, still followed the movements of armies, still corresponded with philosophers who called her the Northern Star of Europe. But age brought loneliness. Potemkin, her great partner in passion and empire, died in 1791. His absence left a silence even palaces could not fill. Catherine mourned him privately, though she continued outwardly with her work. She had always carried grief in silence, transforming it into resolve. Her son Paul, heir to the throne, remained a source of anxiety. Catherine distrusted him, his temper, his narrowness, his lack of vision. She considered bypassing him, perhaps placing her beloved grandson Alexander on the throne instead. But she hesitated, and the chance passed. The future of Russia would not be hers to choose. Still, she worked until the end. She dreamed of new reforms, of codifying laws, of extending Russia's reach still further. Even in her 60s, she rode through her palaces at dawn, issuing orders with the same authority she had wielded for decades. To those who saw her, she was still formidable, an empress who had remade Russia by will alone. In November of 1796, Catherine suffered a stroke. She lingered for a short time, then passed. The empire she left behind was vast, richer, more powerful than it had ever been. Its borders stretched farther, its culture gleamed brighter, its name carried more weight in Europe than at any time before. She had entered Russia as Sophie, a foreign girl with little power. She had seized the throne through daring, ruled with vision, and left as Catherine the Great. Her legacy is not simple. She spoke of liberty but bound millions in serfdom. She admired enlightenment but wielded autocracy. She built schools and museums yet crushed rebellion without mercy. She was contradiction, complexity, humanity. But perhaps that is what made her great. Not that she was flawless, but that she was vast. Too vast to be contained by myth, too complex to be reduced to caricature. When her body was laid to rest in St. Petersburg, the empire bowed its head. And history in its long memory kept her name not as Sophie, not even as Catherine, but as something more, an empress who carved her will upon the world. Catherine the Great. The jungle is never silent. Even at night, cicadas, drone frogs call unseen wings beat against leaves. But beneath that sound, something else had been waiting, centuries of silence sealed behind stone. In 1994, archaeologists working at Palenque in southern Mexico turned their attention to a temple known only as Temple 13. It sat in the shadow of the grand temple of the inscriptions, the resting place of Pakal the Great, the most famous Maya ruler. Temple 13 had long been overlooked, a smaller structure in a city of towering pyramids, but digging revealed a hidden passage, and beneath it a tomb untouched for more than 1,000 years. Imagine the air when the chamber was opened, heavy, stale, filled with the weight of centuries. The archaeologists stepped carefully, their lamps throwing unsteady light across carved walls. And there in the center of the chamber lay a massive stone sarcophagus. When its lid was pried away, what they saw stunned them. Inside was the skeleton of a woman, but she was no ordinary burial. Her bones, her shroud, even the floor of the chamber glowed red, coated in thick powder. Cinnabar ground mercury sulfide covered her completely, as though she had been bathed in blood and flame at once. It clung to her skull, her ribs, her hollowed eye sockets. The archaeologists called her La Reina Roja, the Red Queen. She had been laid to rest with care and wealth. Beside her skull rested a delicate mask of jade beads. Around her body were offerings, shells, pearls, fragments of obsidian ornaments meant for royalty. Whoever she was, she had not been forgotten when she died. She had been honored, exalted, transformed. But no inscription named her, no carved stone proclaimed her deeds. In a civilization that inscribed its kings and queens in glyphs of power, this chamber kept its silence. All that remained was her body stained forever red. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Who was she? Why had she been buried beside the tomb of Pakal? Why the cinnabar so costly and dangerous pressed into every crevice of her resting place? The jungle, of course, gave no reply. Only the cicadas sang their voices rising into the night as though carrying her secret back into the dark. The archaeologists leaned closer, their lamps cutting through the dust and the stillness. The body before them was not only a skeleton, it was a vision. Every surface, every curve of bone, every fold of cloth had been painted red with cinnabar. The powder lay thick, staining the chamber like frozen fire. To the Maya, cinnabar was not decoration. It was symbol. It was blood rebirth, the essence of life itself. To cover the dead in it was to transform them, to send them into the afterlife, clothed not in flesh but in sacred color. To see her body so completely enveloped was to know she was more than noble. She was revered. Beside her skull rested a mask assembled from tiny jade beads. Jade was no mere ornament, it was life made stone. The Maya saw in it the color of maize, the sacred crop, the very breath of the gods. To place jade upon her face was to give her immortality, to let her breathe eternally beneath the earth. Around her lay offerings shells from distant coasts, obsidian blades sharp as light ornaments meant to guide and protect her in the journey beyond death. Each item spoke of wealth, of status, of a life lived at the very peak of Maya society. But it was the red that lingered in the eyes. The cinnabar clung to her like a second skin, as though she had been reborn not as flesh but as symbol. To enter the chamber was to feel its weight, to breathe the dust that once cloaked her body, to stand face to face with an ancient vision of eternity. The archaeologists called her the Red Queen, but to the Maya she must have been more. Perhaps a mother of kings, perhaps a queen in her own right, perhaps a figure so central to Palenque that her body became a temple of its own. No inscription gave her name, no glyphs recorded her voice. And yet her tomb spoke louder than words. A skeleton painted crimson, adorned with jade, her silence was more commanding than any scroll or tablet. The Red Queen lay in darkness for 1,000 years waiting, and when at last her chamber opened, she did not whisper, she blazed. To understand the Red Queen, one must first understand the city that held her. Palenque in the 7th and 8th centuries was no silent ruin. It was alive with color, with sound, with ceremony. Its temples gleamed white in the sun, painted with reds and blues rising above the jungle canopy like mountains shaped by human hands. Water rushed through canals carved with care, courtyards filled with nobles, scribes, priests, and the steady rhythm of drums. At its heart was Pakal the Great, the king whose reign stretched for nearly 70 years. His palace stood broad and magnificent, its towers rising like watchful eyes. His temple of the inscriptions, vast and commanding, was a mountain of stone dedicated to eternity. There, deep within his sarcophagus, lay engraved with images of descent and rebirth, one of the most famous Maya tombs ever found. And beside him, across a courtyard, stood Temple 13, the resting place of the Red Queen. She had not been buried in obscurity, not cast aside into the shadows. She lay within reach of Pakal himself, in a chamber designed with solemn purpose. This was no accident. To be entombed so close to the great king was to share in his eternity. It meant she was no mere relative, no forgotten noblewoman. She was central to the dynasty tied to its heart. The Maya world revolved around dynasties and ritual. Kings ruled as divine intermediaries, their blood offerings feeding the gods, their ceremonies maintaining cosmic balance. But queens too bore weight. They forged alliances, carried lineages, performed rituals that sustained not just households but kingdoms. A queen was not ornament, she was power in her own right, and so the Red Queen's resting place whispered of her importance. She was not hidden in the jungle, not given a lesser tomb. She was laid beside the most celebrated king of Palenque, honoured with cinnabar and jade, surrounded by offerings fit for divinity. When archaeologists stepped into her chamber, they were not only finding a body, They were opening a door into the world of Palenque itself, a world of soaring temples, carved glyphs, blood and ceremony, maize and jade kings and queens who believed themselves woven into the fabric of gods. The Red Queen had lived in this city of stone and spirit, and when she died, she became part of its eternal story. The Red Queen lies in silence, but the questions around her echo louder than any inscription. Who was she? Theories began almost at once. Her burial spoke of immense status. Her proximity to Pakal the Great suggested deep connection. Some believed she was his wife Lady Tsakbu Ajor, the queen consort who bore his heirs and helped secure his dynasty. If so, she would have been mother to the kings who followed the matriarch whose lineage stretched through Palenque's royal line. Others argued she might have been Lady Sakkyuk, Pakal's mother, a woman of formidable power. When her husband died, it was Sakkyuk who stepped forward ruling as regent until her son was of age. It was she who safeguarded the dynasty, who passed the crown to Pakal, who ensured Palenque's survival at a moment when it might have faltered. To be buried near her son, some said, would have been only fitting, but the truth remains elusive. No glyph inside Temple 13 names her. No inscription on her sarcophagus tells her story. The Maya, so precise in recording their kings, left her unspoken, perhaps deliberately. Perhaps her memory was meant to be absorbed into the grandeur of the dynasty, her identity hidden so that her image became larger than a single name. Science has weighed in cautiously. Analysis of her bones suggests she was about 60 years old at her death, an age that fits either queenly figure. Isotope studies hint at a diet rich in maize and elite foods, marking her as unquestionably noble. Yet none of this proves whether she was wife or mother, consort or ruler. The silence is part of her power. Unlike Pakal, who is remembered in glyphs and stone, the Red Queen is remembered through absence. She forces us to imagine, to piece together fragments, to wrestle with uncertainty. Perhaps that is why she endures. If she had been clearly named, she would be a figure among others. But veiled in mystery, she becomes something more, not just one woman, but every queen who stood behind a throne, every mother who raised a king, every consort who carried power in silence. The Red Queen may never speak her name, and yet in the crimson of her tomb, her presence remains undeniable. Before she was the Red Queen, she was a living woman. To imagine her life is to enter a palace of carved stone filled with the sounds of the Maya court. She would have risen at dawn to the calls of birds echoing through the jungle sunlight, striking the stucco walls of Palenque's palace. Servants brought her garments woven with cotton dyed in bright hues, adorned with jade pendants that gleamed against her skin. Her headdress, heavy with feathers, transformed her into something larger than human, an image of divine authority. As queen, her days were more than ceremony. She was mediator, strategist, symbol. At times, she sat beside the king during rituals, her presence validating his blood offerings to the gods. At others, she walked in processions carrying sacred objects, embodying fertility, continuity, power. Queens did not rule armies, but they ruled hearts and alliances. Their marriages tied kingdoms together, their sons carried dynasties forward, their rituals sustained balance. She may have presided over feasts where maize, cacao and tamales were shared beneath torchlight. She may have listened to scribes recite histories traced in glyphs upon bark paper codices. She may have sat with weavers watching textiles grow thread by thread into symbols of lineage and power. But her life was not only splendor. As queen, she carried the weight of expectation. Every gesture, every appearance mattered. She was the axis between gods and people, her body itself a canvas of meaning. To bear children was not only personal, it was political, a duty to continue the line to ensure stability. To fail was to risk chaos. Still, she must have laughed at times. The palace was not only ritual, it was home. Perhaps she walked through gardens where flowers bloomed, where children played. Perhaps she felt the cool stone beneath her bare feet, the humid air against her skin, the murmurs of attendants nearby. And in old age, if she was indeed 60 at her death, she may have sat in shaded courtyards watching younger generations rise, remembering the ceremonies she once led, the faces she once knew. Her life was both ordinary and extraordinary. She ate, she walked, she breathed the same air as all others in Palenque, yet she was set apart, wrapped in jade and feathers, carrying in her person the weight of dynasty. When death came, the people of Palenque chose not to let her fade into earth. They painted her in red, gave her jade for breath, laid her beside Pakal. In life she was queen, in death she became eternal. For centuries the Red Queen lay in silence. When her tomb was opened, she dazzled with colour, with jade, with mystery. But the archaeologists of the 20th and 21st centuries did not stop at wonder. They reached for science. Her bones became evidence. Specialists examined them under microscopes, measuring their wear, their density. They concluded she had been about 60 when she died, an advanced age in a world where life was often short. The teeth told another story. They bore the polish of a noble diet rich in maize and perhaps cacao foods reserved for the elite. Traces of cinnabar were everywhere, seeping into the bone itself. It was beautiful in the chamber, but deadly in the body. To inhale or touch cinnabar is to invite mercury poisoning. Perhaps those who prepared her burial were poisoned themselves, giving their lives in the act of honoring her. Even in death she carried danger. DNA tests were attempted, hoping to link her to Pakal or his descendants. But cinnabar, so thick and corrosive, had damaged the genetic material. The samples offered fragments, not answers. Was she Pakal's wife, his mother, another royal woman? The evidence dissolved like mist. Isotope studies traced the water and food she consumed in life. They suggested she had not been born in Palenque, but came from elsewhere, perhaps brought into the city through marriage, as queens often were. She was both insider and outsider, claimed by Palenque, yet carrying the echo of another land. Technology illuminated details: her age, her diet, her health, her possible origins. Yet even with machines and analysis, the central question lingered. Who was she? Science could not give her name. It could not restore her voice. It could only sketch her outline more clearly. An older woman, richly fed, foreign-born, buried with reverence, painted into eternity. The rest remains silence, and perhaps that is fitting. For what survives of the Red Queen is not only knowledge but mystery. She resists being solved. She endures as a question, a presence, a shadow painted red. Today the jungle has reclaimed much of Palenque. Roots curl through broken walls, vines drape across temples, howler monkeys call from branches above stone once carved for kings. Yet in the silence of Temple 13 the Red Queen lingers. Visitors walk the courtyards where she once lived, stand before the steps that rise to her tomb. They cannot see her, for her remains now rest in study collections preserved behind glass and research. But the image endures: a woman bathed in red powder, her face masked with jade, her bones whispering of a world long vanished. Her legacy is not carved in inscriptions as Pakal's is. Hers is not a story of battles, conquests, or dynastic triumphs. It is a story of presence, of mystery. The Red Queen is remembered precisely because we do not know her name. She forces us to imagine, to wonder, to place ourselves in the gap between evidence and silence. For the Maya, death was not an end but a transformation. Covered in cinnabar, she was reborn into eternity, a being of fire and blood crossing into the realm of the gods. That transformation succeeded. For more than 1,000 years she lay, preserved her story, waiting to be rediscovered. And when at last her tomb was opened, she emerged not as a forgotten noblewoman, but as a figure of wonder, of intrigue, of awe. Her silence is her strength. Kings are remembered in glyphs, but names fade. The Red Queen endures as symbol eternal beyond words. She is every queen, every matriarch, every woman whose power was lived but not inscribed. When the cicadas sing above Palenque and the jungle wind brushes the temples, it is easy to imagine her still there, watching, waiting, painted red, carrying her secret through the centuries. The Red Queen never gave her name, and that is why we will never forget her. Frida Kahlo was not born an icon. She was born a girl in Coyoacan on the edges of Mexico City in 1907, a child of laughter, of gardens, of a household filled with music and contradictions. Her father, a German photographer, taught her discipline and detail. Her mother, a devout Mexican woman, gave her faith and endurance. From the beginning, Frida was both halves at once, sharp and soft, stubborn and fragile, never quite fitting into one frame. As a child, she battled polio, leaving one leg thinner than the other, a limp that shadowed her steps. But she fought back with humor, with wit, with the kind of ferocity that only deep pain can sharpen. By adolescence, she was vibrant, mischievous, full of ambitions that had nothing to do with art. She wanted to study medicine. She wanted a life of action, of independence. And then one September afternoon in 1925, the world broke. She was riding a bus with her boyfriend when it collided with a streetcar. Metal tore through wood, bodies crushed, screams filled the air. Frida was caught in the wreckage. A steel handrail pierced her body, entering her hip and exiting through her pelvis. Her spine shattered, her ribs broke, her legs snapped in several places. She was 18 years old, and in a single moment the path of her life shifted forever. The doctors did not expect her to survive. For weeks she lingered between worlds, hovering in fevers and surgeries. She did not die, but she did not return whole. Her body would remain broken for the rest of her life. Confined to her bed, wrapped in plaster corsets, she found herself surrounded, not by books of medicine, but by mirrors. Her mother hung one above her bed so she could see herself, and Frida, staring at her reflection, began to paint. She painted not as a hobby, not as decoration, but as necessity. Each brushstroke was survival. She painted her pain, her isolation, her body bound in braces and corsets. But she painted too, her gaze direct, unflinching, staring at herself and at anyone who dared to look. The accident had shattered her bones, but it had also unlocked her vision. Frida would not become a doctor of the body. She would become a doctor of truth, dissecting herself on canvas, opening her wounds, not to heal them, but to show them. The bus had broken her life, but it had also created Frida Kahlo, the artist. Lying in bed, wrapped in plaster and pain, Frida Kahlo turned to the nearest subject available, herself. The mirror above her bed reflected not only her face, but her confinement, her solitude, her survival. And so she began to paint what she saw. Her first self-portraits were small, intimate, painted on sheets of tin rather than canvas. She borrowed the style from Mexican folk, ex votos, devotional paintings offered to saints in gratitude for miracles. But instead of saints, she offered herself. Instead of miracles, she offered wounds. Her gaze was unflinching. In painting after painting, Frida stares directly out at the viewer as if daring them to look away. She did not soften her features, did not romanticize her pain. She painted her corsets, her scars, her tears, her blood. Where others sought beauty, Frida sought truth. But truth in her hands was also beauty. She surrounded herself with symbols, monkeys, flowers, thorns, hummingbirds, hearts exposed and bleeding. Each self-portrait was more than likeness. It was a map of her soul. To paint herself was not vanity, it was necessity. "I paint myself," she once said, "because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Through these portraits, she forged a new kind of art. She was neither surrealist nor realist, though both movements tried to claim her. She called herself her own category, her own truth. Each canvas was confession and defiance at once. In a world that prized women as muses, Frida refused to be anyone's passive inspiration. She would be artist, subject, and voice all at once. Every brushstroke declared, "I am here. I am broken. I am alive." Asterisk. Her self-portraits became her diary, her testimony, her resistance. And as the years went on, they became the face by which the world would remember her, not the girl shattered in a bus accident, but the woman who looked back at pain without flinching. By the late 1922nd, Frida's self-portraits had begun to gather notice. Friends marveled at the honesty of her work, the intensity of her gaze, and among those who noticed was Diego Rivera, Mexico's towering muralist, already famous, already larger than life, already twice her age. When Frida first approached him, she did not flatter, she demanded. She carried her paintings to the scaffolding where he worked, brushes dripping color across government walls, and she asked him to look, to tell her if her art was worth the struggle. Diego studied her work and told her what she already knew in her bones: she was an artist, a true one. From that moment, their lives intertwined. Diego was immense in every way: his body, his appetite, his politics, his ego. Frida was fierce, sharp, unyielding. Together they created a marriage that was less a home than a storm. They wed in 1929, she in a traditional Tehuana dress that became her lifelong signature, he in his workman's clothes, looking more like a laborer than a groom. People called it the union of an elephant and a dove. But this dove had claws. Their love was real, but so were the betrayals. Diego was unfaithful, often, sometimes openly, sometimes cruelly. Frida, wounded and enraged, struck back in her own way with affairs of her own with both men and women. Their marriage was not gentle, but it was binding. They could not stay apart, no matter how violently they collided. Together they moved through circles of art and politics. They hosted intellectuals, communists, poets. They painted walls and canvases that proclaimed identity, struggle, defiance. They were Mexico's most famous couple, living symbols of a nation reclaiming itself after revolution. And yet, beneath the noise, Frida's private pain endured. Her body remained broken. Surgeries multiplied. Miscarriages tore through her. At one point, Diego's affair with her own sister cut her to the quick. She left him, divorced him, only to remarry him again a year later. They were bound not by peace but by fire. Frida once said she had suffered two great accidents in her life: the bus crash and Diego Rivera. The first broke her body, the second broke her heart. Both she turned into art. Frida Kahlo was never content to be only a painter. She made herself a symbol, an emblem of Mexico, of revolution, of defiance. Her choice of dress became a political act. She wore the elaborate garments of the Tehuana women of Oaxaca: embroidered blouses, long skirts, heavy jewelry, braided hair adorned with ribbons and flowers. In these clothes, she was not just Frida. She was Mexico itself, wrapped in centuries of tradition, standing against the tide of European fashions that dominated the elite. Her image was art before she ever touched a canvas. Her politics matched her style. Frida embraced communism revolution, the belief that art must belong to the people. She and Diego turned their home into a gathering place for activists, poets, labor leaders. When Leon Trotsky, exiled from Stalin's Russia, fled to Mexico, it was Frida's blue house in Coyoacán that sheltered him. For a time, he became not only their guest, but her lover. Her art, too, carried politics. She painted herself with the Mexican flag, with indigenous symbols, with roots and plants that tied her to the land. She rejected colonial Europe's gaze and insisted on her own identity, fiercely local and yet universally human. Every brushstroke defied the idea that Mexico should imitate others. Instead, she painted Mexico as its own force, wounded, beautiful, unbreakable. But her politics were not only public, they were personal. To paint her own broken body was rebellion against silence. To show miscarriages, blood surgery, pain subjects considered unspeakable was to shatter the polite walls of art. She declared that her suffering was not weakness, but truth. Frida was never quiet, never small. Even when her body confined her, her spirit made her house a world of its own. Her voice sharp and witty filled rooms. She spoke of freedom, of revolution, of art as weapon and confession. She could sit in a wheelchair corset, digging into her skin, and still dominate a room full of men. For Frida, politics was not separate from art or from love or from pain. It was all one life fought on canvases, in conversations, in her very appearance. To see her was to see resistance. To hear her was to hear defiance. To know her was to know that she would never surrender her truth, not to pain, not to betrayal, not to the demands of any world that sought to silence her. For Frida, Kahlo pain was not an interruption of life. It was life. From the moment of the bus accident, her body became a battlefield: broken bones, shattered spine, dislocated pelvis. She endured surgery after surgery, corsets of plaster and steel months in hospital beds. Yet through it all, she painted. Her canvases became mirrors of suffering. In the broken column, she painted herself split open, her torso held together by nails and braces, her face streaked with tears. The landscape behind her was barren, desolate, echoing her own loneliness. She stood there, half flesh, half ruin, unflinching. In Henry Ford Hospital, she painted herself lying on a hospital bed, blood pooling beneath her, surrounded by floating symbols of a miscarriage. She had endured an unborn child, surgical instruments, a snail creeping slowly across. The canvas. It was brutally intimate, the kind of subject most artists avoided, the kind of pain most people hid. Frida placed it at the center. Every canvas was testimony. Her spine was collapsing, her foot was amputated, she could barely walk. Yet she turned her own brokenness into a vision the world could not look away from. What others would have hidden, she revealed. Where others would have sought escape, she confronted. She painted the corsets that imprisoned her, the scars that crossed her skin, the endless surgeries that cut deeper into her body. She refused to separate art from suffering. In her world, they were the same. And yet there was more than agony. There was defiance. In painting herself nailed, broken, bleeding, she declared survival. Her gaze remained steady even when her body did not. Pain had not destroyed her. It had made her unignorable. Frida once said she never painted dreams. She painted her own reality, and reality for her was suffering transformed into color. Her canvases were not cries for pity. They were acts of power. They made her agony visible, undeniable, unforgettable. Where her body had been broken, her art stood whole. For years, Frida Kahlo painted from her bed, from her chair, from within the walls of her blue house in Coyoacan. Her art was intensely personal, born from her body, her blood, her solitude. But eventually the world came knocking. In the 1,932nd and 42nd exhibitions brought her to New York, to Paris, to the centers of modern art. She arrived in gowns of embroidered fabric, heavy jewelry glinting against her skin, hair braided with ribbons and flowers. She was more than a painter, she was a vision. Crowds stared as much at her as at her canvases. In New York, she was both celebrated and exoticized. Her self-portraits hung beside the grand works of the modernists. In Paris, André Breton, leader of the Surrealists, declared her work a ribbon around a bomb. He tried to claim her as one of his own. Frida disagreed. She was not painting dreams, she told him. She was painting her reality. The art world marveled. She painted with a clarity that was both intimate and universal. Her miscarriages, her corsets, her tears, these were not only her wounds. They became symbols of human endurance, of pain transformed into power. Her small canvases painted on tin or board stood as tall as murals in their intensity. And yet, for all the recognition, she remained overshadowed by Diego in the eyes of many. He was the great muralist, the revolutionary artist of the people. She was his wife, fragile, exotic, eccentric. But in time, her work began to demand its own space. Critics saw in her paintings something Diego could never achieve, the raw interior truth stripped of grandeur, painted without compromise. Her art traveled, but she always returned to Mexico. There, her blue house filled with guests, with colors, with animals, with conversation. To step into her home was to step into her mind, vibrant, unrestrained, alive. The world had discovered Frida Kahlo, and yet they had only glimpsed the surface of her defiance. For even as she gained recognition abroad, her greatest struggle remained at home within her own body, which continued to betray her. By the late 1942nd, Frida's body was failing. Surgeries multiplied. Her spine collapsed, further trapping her in corsets of leather, steel, and plaster. Her foot developed gangrene, and in 1953 her right leg was amputated. She wrote in her diary with bitter wit, "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" She spent much of her time in bed, canvases propped against her knees, brushes trembling in her hands. The pain was constant, a tide that never receded. Yet still she painted. Her self-portraits grew darker, filled with skulls, roots, and tears. Her diary, kept in colourful ink and sketches, spilled over with both rage and humour, despair and hope. In 1953, Mexico hosted her first solo exhibition in her homeland. She was too ill to walk. Doctors told her to stay home. She refused. She had her bed carried to the gallery where she lay among her paintings, greeting visitors with laughter, cigarettes, and tequila. The image was unforgettable, Frida broken in body but unbroken in spirit, commanding the room as if the paintings themselves were extensions of her soul. A year later, in 1954, Frida died in the Blue House at the age of 47. Officially, it was pneumonia. Others whispered that it was an overdose of painkillers, perhaps intentional, perhaps not. Her last diary entry carried the words, "I hope the leaving is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her death left Diego shattered. "The most tragic day of my life," he called it. Yet even his grief could not contain her legacy. For decades after, she was remembered mostly as Diego Rivera's wife, but slowly her art rose from the shadows. By the late 20th century, Frida had become an icon of feminism, of resilience, of Mexican identity, of the power of truth in art. Her face, her flowers, her unflinching gaze traveled across the world, more enduring than even Diego's murals. Her legacy is not one of perfection, but of persistence. She did not hide her scars. She painted them. She did not conceal her pain. She transformed it. She did not become a symbol by chasing fame, but by refusing silence. Today, in the Blue House that became her museum, visitors walk through rooms filled with her corsets, her brushes, her paintings, her laughter frozen in colour. They leave not with pity, but with awe. Frida Kahlo lived broken, but she lived unbowed. And in her final years, she carved a legacy not of sorrow, but of fire.